everyone, this is Dr. Alex Avila with Love University, and we're back. I'm an author, psychologist, and speaker. Every week we talk about how to love ourselves, others, in a higher nature, how to improve our finances, career, health, relationships, and spirituality. And today we have a very distinguished guest. We have Mr. Timothy Wilson, who is an esteemed social psychologist and psychology professor at the University of Virginia. He's well known for his research on self-knowledge, adaptive unconscious, and effective forecasting. He has won numerous awards, including the Thomas Jefferson Award of Excellence in Scholarship, and he's been elected to the Academy of Arts and Sciences. He has authored one of psychology's most cited papers, and he's the author of two excellent books, Strangers to Ourselves, Discovering the Adaptive Unconscious, and Redirect, The Surprising New Science of Psychological Change. Welcome to the show, Dr. Timothy.
Oh, great to be here.
Yeah, and you got a lot of fascinating and very interesting concepts in your books and your teaching. The idea of the adaptive unconscious. Now, when I think about unconscious, I think of Freud's version of repressed impulses that people have deep inside. Jungian, collective unconscious archetypes that are passed along to generations. Basically, something that's in our mind that we don't access. So, how do you define the adaptive unconscious?
Well, the adaptive unconscious, the word adaptive is meant to convey how necessary and important it is for the operation of our minds. That
yes.
We couldn't live without the subterranean mental processes that guide us, help us understand the situation we're in. The Freudian unconscious was meant to portray a cauldron of basic drives and urges, which, I actually think there's some truth to.
Yes.
But in addition to that, there's so much of our minds that this operates on automatic pilot, outside of view, that helps guide us through life in very adaptive ways.
Okay. Now, when I'm thinking about this, I also looked a little bit into Malcom Gladwell's book, Blink, talking about thin slicing, kind of like these quick, intuitive responses that we have, these judgments. And apparently adaptive unconscious has some of that as well, where we pick up certain, quick clues, maybe intuitive things. We react, we think, we judge based on that. And that could be helpful, I imagine, in the sense of like doctors that come up with, rapid diagnosis based on kind of a feeling plus, knowledge. You've heard of Gottman's research, John Gottman, marriage research, where you can observe a couple for an hour and then predict maybe up to 90% accuracy if they're going to stay together. And even art experts can kind of like almost smell a fake. There's something about a fake art piece. So I can see those benefits, but there are also maybe disadvantages. The idea that there could be stereotypes. We know police brutality. You think he's a criminal, but he's not. And then they beat him up and all. And also other mistakes that can be made. So tell us about that. Are there advantages and disadvantages of this adaptive unconscious?
Yeah, one analogy we sometimes use is like a modern jetliner that flies on automatic pilot. It doesn't a great deal of information processing that would be hard for a pilot to do by him or herself. Yeah. In the same way, the human mind is equipped with tremendous abilities to process information quickly and non-consciously to guide our behavior. But with that, there does come a downside. If we use faulty information, if we are using stereotypes, that can lead us down a path of quick judgments that can be quite harmful.
Yeah, because the idea of intuition, is very appealing to have these gut instincts or feelings about things and be accurate. And but on the other hand, we can overestimate that. And you talk about the program called Scared Straight, where they used to bring these kids in to the prisons, and the convicts would say, "Hey, this is what you're going to be like if you're in here," to scare them. And it seems like that's intuitive, that would scare people, avoidance kind of thing, right? Or association with fear. But you said that research shows that it's opposite. You actually become more criminals after seeing the criminals, which is I wonder why that is. But you said that's kind of goes against the so-called intuitive part of it.
Yeah, one of my pet peeves as a psychological scientist is that people use their intuition to start new programs without any attempt to test whether they work. We never do that in the medical realm. If someone said they had a cure for diabetes or something and they made it in their basement, we'd never take it if they hadn't been subject to strict testing. With psychological interventions, people often just use common sense. And the Scare Traders program was a great example of that. Sure, it seems like it would help to scare kids. But it turns out one of the worst things you can do with at-risk adolescents is bring them together. They tend to want to impress each other more than adults. And
like a macho braggadocio kind of thing. Like,
yeah.
The worst you can do.
Yeah.
Now, is the unconscious, is that similar to intuition, or is it more of like a heuristic where it's a shortcut? How would you classify it?
Well, some of both. I mean, it can be everything from quickly identifying things in our environment to interpreting things in our environment to triggering emotions. These are all things that I mean, in one of my books, I do as kind of a counterfactual exercise of imagine the unconscious mind wasn't working, what our day would be like. And first of all, we never get out of bed because our perceptual system wouldn't guide us to let us stand up straight.
Right.
But it would just be terrifying every situation we were in would seem new and totally unfamiliar. And we would have to use our conscious minds to slowly process, what was going on. Yeah. And this is what our adaptive unconscious is doing for us: is interpreting, using heuristics, guiding us in what is hopefully a good direction.
I see. So apparently there's a lot more power or strength in this adaptive unconscious than we ever knew, because we thought the conscious mind is the one that controls everything, right? We make decisions, we analyze stuff. But I think you're saying that the adaptive unconscious has a lot of this process underneath that is happening at the same time, giving us this kind of knowledge that we need.
Yeah, definitely. And, at the same time, I would agree with you that I wouldn't say that intuition is always correct. Years ago, I did some research showing that we can actually get ourselves into trouble by overanalyzing our feelings and trying to make lists of pluses and minuses. And it's best to sort of trust our initial impulses. But that's only true if it's based on good information. But intuition based on very little information. For example, if you go into a bar and you meet someone, you know them for 5 minutes, and your intuition says this will make a good marital partner. No, do not trust that intuition. You don't have any information.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like the halo effect. Like you think someone's physically attractive, you think they'll have other qualities like they're smart, they're loyal, and that may not be the case.
But if you know someone for a year and and your intuition is this is the one, then that's a pretty good intuition to trust.
There you go. So intuition plus research equals possible success. You're saying in terms of this. Now, you even mentioned in your life that you had I guess maybe a bias that came out. You said you went to a PTA meeting, and your wife had told you there's this one guy that's very obnoxious, and he's kind of aggressive or something. And you went there and you listened to the guy, and he was kind of obnoxious. And you told, "Hey, your wife, you're right." And she told you, well, I was the wrong guy. It was like Bill or Phil. It was a different person. But you had somehow internally processed that perception. You saw him, the guy that was okay, as aggressive. So how does that work? How does that happen?
That's a beautiful example of an embarrassing example, I might say, of your kind of self-fulfilling prophecies where once we expect something to be so, it's easy to find information that confirms it. And I was listening to this guy who I thought was the one my wife had said was a bad listener and kind of obnoxious. And I could find evidence that was true, right, even though it was the wrong guy. And
was it Phil or Bill that was the obnoxious guy?
I don't remember which one was Bill or Phil.
Sounds almost the same, right?
Just that I was wrong and embarrassed about it.
As long as you're not the obnoxious guy, it's okay, right? You're fine. It's really fascinating. This stuff is it's kind of very practical, common sense, but it's also deeply psychologically research oriented too. So you're kind of putting the science behind things that we kind of feel, but we're not sure about. And the other thing that you talk about is the idea of effective forecasting. The idea that we predict how we're going to feel in the future. This is very interesting. If I get this job, I'm going to be happy. but then you get the job, you're not that happy, or the relationship. This happens quite a bit. So we may not be as accurate as predicting our feelings, and possibly, we overestimate the impact of the event on our emotions. Maybe that job didn't really change our emotions that much. Or maybe we overestimate our resilience in terms of fear. It's going to happen, the catastrophe. But once it happens to you, you can adapt because humans are adaptable. So how do you see this happening? Do you see this effective forecasting?
Yeah, I think this is when we talk about self-knowledge, we often don't think about trying to imagine what will be like in the future. But this is a very important kind of self-knowledge to judge how our lives might unfold and how we'll react if things go our way or don't go our way. After all, we steer our lives according to what we think will make us happy or avoiding things that will make us unhappy. But along with my friend and colleague, Daniel Gilbert, we've done a lot of research on what we call affective forecasting, which is, well, how accurate are those predictions about how we'll respond? How happy will we be if we win the lottery? Or how sad and for how long will we be if we lose a loved one? And we have found repeatedly that people tend to overestimate the emotional impact of future events. And by that, I don't mean that good things won't be good or bad things won't be bad. It's just maybe not quite as good or as long, make us feel as good for as long as we thought, and bad things maybe won't make us feel as bad for as long as we thought. And as you said, we tend to be very resilient at making sense of the world. And that's a really good thing for negative events, that we can eventually find some meaning in terrible things that happen to us, and we feel terrible maybe not quite as long as we expected to. Many of us have experienced this with romantic breakups, where we think, the world will come to an end if this person leaves us. It feels terrible when someone does leave us, but the world doesn't come to an end. Eventually, we do get over it.
That makes sense. I think some researchers talk about the happiness set point, where initially with a positive event, you go up to a certain amount of happiness, then you go back to your previous level, maybe the lottery. Some people, when they win the lottery, they even commit suicide. They overspend and, they go back to a depressive state. And sometimes when people lose a limb, there's depression, but then they often go back to a certain happiness point. What do you think of that idea? Is there a happiness set point?
Yeah, well, yes and no. I do think there are things we can do to change that set point a little bit. I don't think we're doomed to one particular level of happiness. And I think there are things we can do to become happier. But I don't think it's in the external world where this thing will make me happy forever or make me sad forever. Things, we do tend to adapt very quickly to these external things that happen to us.
I see. One thing I find interesting in the adaptive unconscious is what we call non-conscious goal setting. And you give an example of, let's say you're playing your niece in tennis, and you don't want to embarrass her. So, you're going to kind of like not take it easy on her, right? You're not going to hit to the corners and all that. But if you play your obnoxious neighbor, you can hit as much as you can and try to get him to run and beat him. But you don't think about that. It's kind of an unconscious adaptation. I used to play tennis in high school, so I kind of can visualize that. Are you a tennis player, Dr. Wilson?
I'm actually not. I was more a basketball player than baseball player.
Well, you probably take it easy on some people that you like versus not like. Is that an unconscious thing people do?
Well, this is kind of on the new territory in research, where people are looking at it. Is the unconscious capable even of setting its own goals without us knowing it? We tend to think of goals as something we set consciously, and for the most part, that's true. But there is some evidence that something in the environment can trigger a goal without us fully realizing that it's been triggered. Maybe it's a competitive goal or a cooperative goal that I think, many of us had the experience of sort of catching ourselves thinking, wait a minute, what am I doing trying to beat my niece so handily, not realizing this goal that has been triggered unconsciously.
So which is the beating the niece competitive? Is that the unconscious or the conscious one?
Well, I'm not sure one is more competitive than the other. It really depends on the particular situation and what our current goal is.
Right. Well, I'm saying when you say I'm going to take it easy on my niece versus the neighbor, but you're very competitive. Is that an internal competitive nature that it's hard for you to take the foot off the pedal, or is that something
it could be, yeah.
Okay. Now, if you remember the old Terminator series with Arnold Schwarzenegger, they created the machine, right? I think Teledyne, and then it was supposed to be like a good robot, but then it kind of became evil and it took over. So, in a sense, do we control our adaptive unconscious, or does it control us?
Well, good question. And, I think, again, I like the analogy of a modern airliner where that we can be on automatic pilot, but we do have the ability to grab the reins and let our conscious selves, grab a hold of it and change course. And, I don't think we're like automatons that we somehow go on these uncontrolled rages or something. I think we're able to. I think we have to be vigilant and make sure we're acting according to how we want to. But no, I don't think we're in fear of being the Terminator.
Well, what about obsessive compulsive people? I mean, aren't they driven by their obsession and compulsion? Could that be part of that?
Well, sure. I mean, when we get into mental illnesses, they're an addiction. Another example would be addictions. It can be very hard to overcome. But sure, those are cases where conscious control becomes more limited.
Right. And the other thing is, how do we tap into this adaptive unconscious, as you're saying, or can monitor it or change it? And I think you mentioned introspection, where you start to look into your feelings and your behaviors actually to see how you're feeling. But then there's a drawback to that. For example, you could misattribute, what you're really feeling. So I'm thinking of, let's say your friend is broke and you give him some money. So you can say, well, I'm a compassionate person, but maybe deep inside you have what's called downward comparison, where you feel better because he's not doing well. So there's could be another motivation. So that could be an issue. So how do you deal, or, the actor observer bias? I think you mentioned that, where you attribute bad things that happen to you to externals, and then other people that do the same thing to their internal. So you cut someone off on the freeway. Well, I'm late to work, and I'm trying to get there. If they cut you off, they're a jerk. So how do we monitor that part, the introspection part?
Yeah, introspection is I don't think it's a direct pipeline into the unconscious, as some people might imagine it to be. As Freud, in fact, thought it could be, that if we remove our defenses, we can sort of open a trapdoor and look directly into our unconscious. I think of introspection as more of a construction. It's a way to help us tell a story, to try to notice what we're feeling and make the best story we can for who we are and what we're doing. And that story surely is biased by wanting to view ourselves positively. So not as the jerk, but as someone who, had good intentions. There's no doubt that we are trying to put a rosy spin on ourselves, but we're trying to be accurate too. And I think introspection is, again, I like the storytelling analogy. We're weaving a story about ourselves much as we do about other people.
I see. I like that. And the other thing I really liked about your book, toward the end, you're talking about acting as if. For example, if you're shy, you act as if you're not shy. And I wrote a book actually called The Gift of Shyness that talks about the positives of shyness. Shy people can be sensitive, good listeners, and even loyal. But the problem is the self-conscious side, right? What I call the observer. So one of the techniques we talk about is to become more of the actor and less of the observer. The actor is the spontaneous, natural side of you. So I say, find an actor or actress that you really admire, maybe kind of act and talk a little bit like them and practice like that. And you said you were shy yourself, an introvert. Did you try something like that?
Yeah, I am on the shy side. And instead of just trying to introspect to make myself change, I do think this principle of the so-called do good, be good principle of changing our behavior first and letting our personality catch up to it. And, it's not magical, but I do think there was a time when I wished I wouldn't be so shy at parties. And I said, okay, I'm just going to make an effort. I'm going to go up to someone I don't know and strike up a conversation. And, that took some effort for me, but I often found they were relieved to have someone initiate a conversation. They too were feeling a bit,
Most people are afraid of each other in some ways, like in terms of social interactions.
Yeah. And once you do that, the next time becomes a little easier. And,
right. By the way, you kind of remind me of Clint Eastwood a little bit. You look a little bit like Clint.
Well, I'll make your day.
Yeah, because I imagine, is there an actor that you would maybe even model yourself kind of like that you think has confidence or something you like to be like? Or even a personage in history?
Yeah, I mean, not a particular actor I can think of. I mean, just people I've known who are. My friend Dan Gilbert, he's been my collaborator for years, and he is one of the funniest people I know.
He writes on happiness, right?
Yeah. He is an amazing public speaker and not at all shy. And so if I could emulate him a little, I would be happy.
That makes sense. But I mean, some introvert shy people are actually great actors, because they take on the persona, right, of the extrovert or the non-shy. So it's kind of interesting. And they get deep into the character. So there's some advantages to that.
Yeah, that's never been something I've been good at, but yeah.
Well, you never know. So the other thing is redirect. Now this is a good tie-in. We're talking about narratives and stories. So you're talking about the idea that you can change your inner story, right? Your inner cognitions, your inner beliefs, and all that, and that can increase your happiness, I guess, in life and success. And you mentioned that for you, happiness is based on 3 elements: is meaning, optimism or hope, and sense of purpose. And it's kind of interesting. And you mentioned one of the psychologists, Dweck, who talks about the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. So growth meaning that I believe I can improve my mind, neuroplasticity, I can change my brain and become better. So people that have that mindset, internal locus of control, can actually improve, right, and do things. But on the other hand, if you say, well, I can't really change, I'm stuck in my ways, the fixed mindset, then they're not going to try harder. And as a result, they'll fail. So what do you think about that idea?
Yeah, I'm a fan of that work. There's now very good evidence that it can help. There's interventions that help middle school students by getting them to change from a fixed to a growth mindset about their math abilities, for example. No one thinks this can turn a D student into an A student, but it can improve academic performance because, as you say, once I have the belief that this isn't just something fixed, I try harder, I seek out help more, I try different strategies. It drives me crazy when I hear people saying, I'm not a math person, because you never hear people say, I'm not a word person. And so why is it okay to say I'm not a math person? Now, of course, some of us have more facility with numbers than others, right. But you should be, it's not that people aren't math people, it's that they maybe didn't learn the right strategies.
That makes a lot of sense, yeah. And then there's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So the student gets an F in math. I'm terrible at math, so I'm going to skip my math class. So I'm not going to anyways. And then they keep getting bad grades, and it keeps going. The depressive mindset.
Yeah.
And I assume you can do the opposite, right? If you believe that you can change, that you can improve your grades. So mindset is very important, and I think the story we're talking about is part of that. But of course, genetics is very important too. What percentage do you think is mindset versus genetics? Do you think?
Well, that's an impossible question to answer, I think, and I've heard Carol Dweck being asked that question, and she'll dodge it too, I think. but she'll say, we don't really know the answer, but the more we believe it's changeable, the better off we are.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Some people say 50-50, and some people with identical monozygotic twin studies, like if one is a high IQ, the other one is like 80% chance of high IQ at the age of 20. So, but then, there are ones that are not, right? They don't have the same IQ. So it's probably, that's interesting to talk about, the environmental influences. But ideally, you talk about some exercises. You have interesting exercises, and I like that you have practicality in your book as well, in terms of how to change the narrative, as you say. I think you call it story resetting or something like that, how to reset your story.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned as a pen and baker writing exercise where people write down after a traumatic event or something, they have a little bit of time to think about it, and then they write how they felt. And you said that's better than the debriefing, where immediately you're flooded with all the emotions and it kind of sticks with you. So why is that important to do that, the writing exercise?
Yeah, this is, James Pennebaker has pioneered this expressive writing technique that study after study shows is beneficial. And the way it works is pretty simple. He asks people to take out a piece of paper and write about something that's deeply troubling them for about 15 minutes, typically 15 minutes for 2 or 3 nights in a row. And I'll add an important caveat. It's usually best to do this when we have a little distance from the event. So if something traumatic has just happened, a lover has left you, it's not great to do this 5 minutes later. But then a couple of weeks pass, got a little distance. And what this writing exercise seems to do is to force people to find new meaning in it. To often what happens is people start out writing in a very kind of jumbled, nonsensical way, just putting down words. But by the end, they've made a story that understands this event in a way that can put it behind them. And people who do this tend to show better health in the ensuing weeks. Students get better grades. It's just a way to sort of package up a negative event and to some extent leave it behind.
Interesting. So it's kind of a reflective, introspective process where you take a step back and then process your feelings, as opposed to the old catharsis, right, where you have a flooding of emotions, and that can actually do something to make it worse.
Yeah.
So you get frozen in your negative traumas and images.
And there's some evidence that it helps to take a third-person perspective too. So rather than writing in the first person, if I were doing it, instead of saying, I feel this, I feel that, I say, well, Tim looks like he's feeling this and feeling that. And it's just a way to sort of gain a different perspective on what's happening to us.
And I think I like that one of the exercises you call step back and ask why. So you think of a time where you're angry, and then you imagine you're a little fly on the wall observing that and asking yourself, why did I get angry at my boss, for example? Well, maybe I felt overwhelmed by all the work, or maybe the boss got angry because he's going through a divorce. So it gives you like a perspective, right? When you are more objectively looking at it from a distance, it's a lot better.
Yeah.
And also, I like story prompting. I think that was a really cool idea, where you kind of gradually reshape people's inner dialogue or inner story in a more positive way. And you give some great examples. You talk about college freshmen, maybe they got a D, for example, after doing well in high school. And now they say, oh, I can't make it in college. It's too hard. And you give them a little 30-minute intervention where you have them read a survey that, students often have to adjust to it, and they can do it and get better grades. And then they watch an interview with upperclassmen, right, that did actually improve their grades. So why does that work, the story prompting, in terms of changing your story?
Well, I just think there are times in life, often at times of transition, like we're starting college or starting high school or in a new relationship, where the narrative isn't set. We're not sure yet exactly why things are happening to us the way they are. And we're at risk at those times if something bad happens, we get a bad grade on our first college test, to go down a negative path of self-blame and thinking that we can't make it. And it's at those sort of critical narrative forks in the road that social psychologists have come up with some really clever interventions to just nudge people on a better path, to down the path of, well, no, this isn't a reflection that I can't do it. It means that I need to try harder or find different strategies. There are some really great interventions researchers have done with starting college, people who feel like they might not belong at that institution. So African-American students at a predominantly white institution might justifiably so feel this institution historically has not treated Blacks very well, and maybe this isn't a welcoming place for me. That can be self-defeating if it prevents them from trying to adapt, and they might misinterpret standard homesickness that everyone feels as a way of thinking, no, this place is a hostile environment. And there's some clever interventions where they just, again, a little nudge to say, everyone feels homesick at first a little bit. It can be a little hard to adjust to college, but it gets better. And one particular study found remarkable effects where the African-American students were doing better 3 years later after getting that 1 hour intervention in their freshman year.
It's very powerful. And you mentioned that just a little bit of time in the right direction can actually transform a lot of these negative patterns and thoughts.
And it becomes self-sustaining, where if I sort of change my mindset a little bit and change my story, and so I try a little harder, that can reward the new story, and then I try a little harder the next time. So there's kind of a positive snowball effect that can happen.
Yeah, that's really a very good way of paying it forward, to ourselves and to others, and brings more positivity. The other example I kind of liked was the abusive mom scenario, where some of the moms were physically abusive to babies because they got mad at them because they were crying too much or something. So either you think of it as that difficult baby that's trying to harass me, or you think the baby needs my help. I can take care of it. And that intervention actually, you said, reduced the child abuse as well.
Yeah, this is an amazing study done by some researchers at UC Santa Barbara that they found that that parents who abuse their children sometimes do have this irrational way of blaming the child. This child doesn't like me, or is being difficult. 6-month-year-old doesn't have those feelings. But they did this little intervention to try to redirect that narrative, where they had home visitors just in a kind of Socratic method, just question these interpretations. So they say to the mother, well, when your baby's crying, why do you think your baby's crying? And they say, well, the baby's being difficult. And they say, well, can you think of another reason why maybe your baby's crying? And sort of nudge them into less harmful interpretations. Say, well, maybe I didn't burp them enough, or maybe they need a nap, things you can do to change it. And that little nudging of the story reduced child abuse fairly significantly in this at-risk sample.
It's very powerful. I'm thinking that as kind of empathy, putting yourself in another's shoes, which increases your compassion, desire to relieve their suffering. So those are, I think, interlocking ideas.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Instead of just I'm the one that's being overwhelmed. The baby also needs my care, and they're vulnerable. So the other thing is interesting. You talk about the best possible self exercise, where you visualize yourself in the future, and then you ask yourself, how did I get there? Maybe I studied, I did internship or graduate school, and I got a profession I wanted, a relationship. I had to, find that right person. But then I would ask you also, Dr. Wilson, do you believe in positive thinking? I'm going to sit here and say, I'm getting better. I'm smart. Is that going to work?
Well, not likely just by itself. And I'm a little hard on my book on some other books that have how to adjust positive thinking. Right. And in fact, there's some evidence that it can be harmful just to imagine good things happening to us, because we begin to almost feel we already have it, and we don't have to work as hard because this good thing's already in my mind. So the real key is, as you said, is to not only imagine what we want, but imagine how we're going to get there. What steps do we need to take to get that A in this course, or to get this job that I want to get, and outline the implementation strategy to get from A to B.
Yeah. So how you got there is very important. In terms of like you said, the process of it, that's the key to visualize it, right? And kind of to actually.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then the other thing is, you said to do good, to be good. So you're kind of reversing it, as opposed to saying, well, I want to be good, I'm thinking about it. But actually, go out, maybe help a charity, or be kind to others, smile at others, and help the homeless, whatever it is. And you say that changes your internal trait, because you start to feel elevated and, positive about yourself, and also helping others. So how does that work, the be good first?
Well, we touched on this earlier, but I think we're very good observers of ourselves, as odd as that sounds. And we keep track of what we do. And So often changing the behavior first is a way to change how we feel about ourselves. And I think, when we're feeling down and a little blue, our tendency is to want to lie on the couch and not do anything. But if we can manage to get ourselves up and go out and do something for somebody else, there's good research that shows that can actually make us feel better. One of my favorite studies was done at University of British Columbia, where they just approached students on the campus in the morning and they gave them $20. And they said, but here's the catch. We want you to spend it by 5:00. And they randomly assigned them to two conditions. In one condition, they said, spend it on yourself. Treat yourself to a little gift, a meal. Or they said, spend it on somebody else. You have to use this $20 to take a friend out to lunch or give it to charity or whatever. You decide, but it has to be for someone else's benefit. They then called people up in the evening and said, how'd your day go? How happy were you today? And the ones who were the happiness were not the ones who spent it on themselves, but the ones who helped someone else. It encourages social connections. We feel good about ourselves. There's a glow to helping others that can be very powerful.
Yeah, and then there's something called elevation, where you actually see others do well, and you actually could feel better too. You could feel inspired. Yeah, so it's almost like a positive chain that goes on. So that's a beautiful philosophy, but also it's very practical, right? We can use it to help change the world in a way. And I think Love University, one of our mottos is to help love yourself, others, and a higher nature, and by expressing that love without expectation. That's powerful. Now, Dr. Wilson, what is your story?
Well, that's a big question.
How do you see yourself? I mean, what's your self-concept?
Well, can you narrow it down at all?
Well, in terms of your work and your life, like we all have a mission or a purpose. I don't know, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, you've caught me at a time of transition. So I've actually just retired from teaching as of a week ago. I mean, I'm still going to be active in research, I think, but I taught my last class a week ago. Wow. And, I hope my research has had some benefit to others, and that my teaching has touched people. Certainly not everyone who had to sit in my classroom, but I feel, I hear from students occasionally that well, I'll tell you a quick story that made me feel good. I had a student write me, said, I'm sure you don't remember me, but I was in your class 15 years ago, and it was a big lecture class. And on the day of the final exam, I overslept and I missed it. I showed up right when the exam was ending. And I was in tears, and I thought I was going to flunk the course. And you said to me, relax, just take the exam. And I did, and I did well. And that changed my life because I went on to actually study psychology and become a psychologist. I obviously had no memory of this, but it did illustrate to me that very small acts of kindness can have a big impact on other people, and cost us almost nothing, and yet help someone else. And I hope in my life I've had more than that one example.
That's beautiful, yeah. They say that kindness is when you forget what you did, but they never do. The person never received it, and they pass it along. Mm-hmm. So I would almost summarize today. I would say, you said you're a stranger to yourself, but I would say know yourself, love yourself, and then help others. I think, does that summarize?
That's a good philosophy. I would agree.
To thy own self be true. Doctor, it's been wonderful to have you on the show. You have some wonderful ideas. I can see you have a lot of compassion too. There's a lot of caring in what you do for others.
Well, thank you.
And where can we hear more about you? I know you have a lot of books and websites. What are you excited about that you want to talk to us about? People that listen to it.
Well, since I'm at this transition point, I'm not quite sure what the future has in store. I hope I'm not done with my research. I love doing psychological studies to further these ideas. And I'm still involved in some intervention studies to help students learn better. So I hope that continues.
Is there a website or any things people can contact?
I'm not, I have a very rudimentary website. If you Google Timothy Wilson, there's a few links on there to my books and other resources.
Okay, so Strangers to Ourselves and Redirect are the two very fascinating books. Maybe you and I can collaborate in the future in some way. I'd love to have you on.
That'd be great.
And it's been wonderful to have you. So again, this is Dr. Alex Avila. And if you have questions for today's guest, if you want to comment, you can reach us at loveuniversity.love. Write to us at loveuniversitylove@gmail.com. Call us at 310-226-8090. So again, knowing thyself, loving thyself, helping others, and tapping into that part of you that is very positive, can help others. Thank you, Dr. Wilson, for being on the show. Until next time, this is Dr. Alex Avila. And put away your notebooks, your iPads, your phones. Class is now dismissed, as Dr. Wilson has joined me today. And that was our interview with Mr. Timothy Dr. Wilson, a very fascinating guy who loves research. He loves science, and he's really trying to help a lot of people. And his main purpose is to know yourself, your adaptive unconscious, tap into those inner powers that we have, the intuition, the ability to make decisions and judgments, and also to change our stories, our negative stories that keep us down. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not attractive enough. And change that into more positive stories. Can be successful. I'm intelligent. I'm attractive. And I'm loving. So once we do all those things, we can really become the best we can be, and we can become part of the love that we have inside. So this is Dr. Alex Avila. If you want to more about our Love University, if you want to learn more about it, you can download the show at Podbean, Spotify, SoundCloud, and iTunes. And pick up a copy of my book, The Gift of Shyness, which we talked about today, at Amazon.com. So you can follow us and like us on Facebook and Instagram at Love University Podcast. You can follow us on Twitter at Love Letter U Podcast. So until next time, this is Dr. Alex Avila of Love University. Class is now